In this episode, we break down number 10 Clemson's 49-14 victory over Wake Forest. The Tigers erupted in the second quarter with 28 points and 2 crucial interceptions.
Mistake by Bachmeyer, tries to force this to Deuce Alexander. He's going to be on an in cut, and you're going to see the safety just keep his eyes on the quarterback, and he's going to step right in front of this football. Excellent job back in coverage.
Cade Klubnik dominated, throwing 309 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Phil Mafah rushed for 108 yards and 2 scores. Tight end Jake Brenningstool added 104 receiving yards and a touchdown.
It's tough to argue with what they've got going on.
Oh, and here comes a double pass. Williams throwing for Brenningstool on the money. Touchdown, Clemson.
With 566 total yards and 36 minutes of possession, Clemson controlled the game from start to finish. Stay tuned for a full breakdown of all the action.
Watson, touchdown!
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 8 of the Nachos and Analysis College Football Show. I am Drew Archer, and as always, my co-host joins me, Matthew Johnson. How's it going, Matthew?
It is good. We are back and happy and excited to be back. Do you want to go over for the listeners, give them an update on your situation?
Yeah, so this season, between you and I, I've done 3 solo episodes. I did one by myself at one point a few weeks back, and then you held it down the last 2 weeks. But yeah, no real damage here from the hurricane. Unfortunately, it just took over 2 weeks to get internet back. I just got internet back this past Sunday. I was out of town in Alpharetta and returned home to internet. So it feels good to be back in the 21st century. So, but thanks for holding it down while I was out of office.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy that we didn't have to take weeks off and that we figured out a way to even get you involved on the last week. So,
that second week I felt bad. I'm like, all right, I got to at least film some kind of video and send to Matthew to put in there.
It's hard because, like, you could film a video, you just, like, couldn't upload it at home necessarily, or, like, had to do it on cell data, so... Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was really bad quality. Like, it came through on text message, and I put it in. It was probably like 360p or something, and I just blew it up to fit the screen 1080p.
Yeah, it looked good on my phone, but then unfortunately, when I went to go try to upload it to the drive, it just was not working. So even though I have Wi-Fi back, data and everything has still been kind of spotty around here. Shout out to hotspots, because that was the only way I was able to watch football the last 2 weekends is added 60 gigs of hotspot to my cell phone plan so I could watch a blurry football game the last few weeks. But regardless, good to be back. I missed a crazy weekend to chat with you last week about all the upsets, and then it ended up being another good weekend of football. There was the potential for a lot of upsets, but then some of the teams ended up holding out. And speaking of that, we were at a sports bar in downtown Alpharetta. And the week prior, I watched the Clemson game at a local bar here in Greenville. And we got there early, and I was rooting for Alabama to get beat by Vandy, but not this week when they were playing South Carolina. So there were a lot of people cheering for Alabama's demise 2 weeks in a row, but I think me, Dad, and Devin were the only ones rooting for South Carolina in this game. Which what were some of your favorite games this weekend, Matthew?
I mean, it's hard to talk about games this week without talking about that one. I just had a couple questions. Is Alabama bad? And then, depending on your answer to that, is Georgia bad? And then, depending on your answer to that, is Clemson bad? And then my last question is South Carolina good?
I think that this is the perfect way for the season to go the first year of the 12-team playoff, because I think there's a lot of parity this year. You could argue that Texas, maybe Oregon, are elite, but everybody else, they have pieces to the puzzle, but any given Saturday, somebody can lose. And there's been a lot of competitive football games, especially from teams that we may not have expected from. Personally, I thought heading into this game with South Carolina, Alabama, after the week they had prior to, was going to come out swinging. I took Alabama to cover the spread in this game, and that did not happen at all.
Yeah, I agree with the parity, and especially like who would have thought coming into week 7 now that Texas would be considered the best team in the country. And I mean, they have a big game this week too. That'll be a fun one to talk about. But I agree. I think NIL really helped that out, and even the conference realignment really spread out the talent just across the country.
Admittedly, I did not expect Texas to have early success in the SEC. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to be bad, but to be the only remaining undefeated team, you got a huge matchup with Georgia this week. And if Georgia plays the way that they have been the last couple of weeks, they're going to be staring down 2 losses. But another good weekend of football. South Carolina, I was to explain this to somebody the other day. Just like the LSU game, keep the South Carolina fans hopeful, keep them in the game, let them think they have a chance, only for them to lose at the end. So I was pleased with that. You had another great game in Ohio State, Oregon. Oregon wins 32-31.
Before you move on for the Ohio State-Oregon game, did you see like the coaching at the end of the game, the end game clock management by Dan Lanning?
I wonder if that's actually, if he intentionally did that.
I watched an interview that he gave this weekend, like after the game, where he like confirmed that he did it intentionally.
Yeah.
So for the listeners who don't know, Ohio State had the ball with 10 seconds left and about 60 yards of field to cover, down 1. So they only needed a field goal. And on their first play, Oregon runs a 12th player out onto the field right before the snap. Ohio State runs the play. Oregon's in a prevent defense, and obviously they have 12 men on the field, so it's not a big play. There's a flag on Oregon that gives Ohio State 10 yards, but it also took 6 seconds off the clock, leaving Ohio State only 1 actual play to try and score. So, Dan Lanning did confirm that he did that on purpose. I think that's just a really good heads-up play and like knowing the game and the rules of what you can and can't do.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure of the source, but I did see a headline today saying that the NCAA was looking into this loophole. I hate when people try to step in and fix things like that. That was just a great strategy, and we may never see anything like it again. Also, just as an Ohio State hater, seeing how that game unfolded there, that last play, quarterback not aware, sliding, and then hands on the head. Like who was the Ohio State quarterback last time?
Justin Fields.
He throws that interception, hands on his head, same type scenario. So this sports fan was pleased with the way that one ended. You got Mississippi State traveling to Georgia last week, and Mississippi State is terrible, and they hung in this game with Georgia for a little while. Maybe Georgia is not what we thought.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch this one, but the final score was very surprising to me because I think, like you, was like going into this game thinking UGA was bouncing back, having a big week this week against maybe the worst team in the SEC, and gave up 30 points to Mississippi State.
Yeah. Not a good look for the Bulldogs there, with a big matchup with Texas coming up this weekend. Ole Miss, LSU. LSU lucky to win this game there, but a crazy environment there. I was just talking with my brother this weekend. I'm planning to try to go to that game when Clemson plays there in a few years. Looking forward to experiencing the other Death Valley.
Yeah, that would be a fun one to take a trip to. This was one of my picks last week too, and I was terrified going because I had to go. I went to sleep. Like, I was trying to stay up and watch it, but it was getting too late, and then it went into overtime, and I was just like having nightmares in my sleep of that LSU Texas A&M game from a couple years ago, where what changed the game that ended up changing the overtime rules, where they end up scoring like probably a combined 150 points in overtime trying to decide a winner of that game. So I was very happy to wake up and see that under still hit.
Yeah. And speaking of under, septic tanks under the ground, that might have been a terrible transition. But regardless, if you have septic tank issues or want to get your septic tank checked out or serviced, give Alan Powell and the folks at Pump Monkey Septic Service a call. They service the upstate of South Carolina. You can reach them at 864-710-2211. They're on Facebook. They're on Instagram. Does great work. I know Mickey Plyler on the Roars giving him a shout out. He's been out there to do work for Mickey. So give him a call at 864-710-2211. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey. Also, shout out on your ad read last week, too. I guess you've listened to me say it enough over the years. You had it down pat.
I did feel like I was just like, what would Drew say in this situation?
But let's talk some Clemson football. It was a big weekend for the Tigers. A little slow start there in the first quarter. I thought maybe the offensive line may have forgotten to travel. Clemson do give up their first points in the first quarter of the season to Wake Forest. Some stats stuff from the game. With their 4-0 start in conference play, Clemson has now achieved this milestone for the 10th time under Dabo Swinney. Clemson has extended its remarkable winning streak against Wake Forest to 16 consecutive games, setting a new record for the longest winning streak in series, surpassing the previous 15-game run from 77-91. Tigers secured their 8th straight road victory against Wake Forest. Tigers last lost at Winston-Salem back in 2008, marking a big achievement there. Coach Swinney made history as the first ACC coach to win 175 games. Clemson boasts an impressive 83-4 record when winning the turnover margin since 2011. High-scoring game this past weekend. Clemson has scored 40 points or more in 4 of its last 6 games this season, matching the 2020 performance, showcasing the offensive prowess early on. Tigers' 42-plus point game versus Wake Forest marks the 12th time they've reached this total in the series, surpassing Georgia Tech for the most games against a single opponent in school history. The Tigers have now recorded 400 or more yards in 5 straight games, a first since 2020. Clemson won the turnover margin 2-0, marking the 10th time in 11 games they finished with a positive turnover margin. Speaking of running backs, Phil Mafah recorded his 4th 100-yard rushing game of the season, marking a significant achievement as he becomes the first Tiger to do so in a 5-game span since Travis Etienne did it in 2019. Clemson's defense allowed only 1 sack for the 5th straight game, demonstrating their improvement in protection and dominance on the line of scrimmage. Matthew, I got an early trivia question for you.
Let's do it.
All right. So, during the game, Cade Klubnik passed Rodney Williams and Cullen Harper to move into 9th on Clemson's all-time leaderboard for career yards of total offense. Who is missing from the top 10? So, obviously, the top 3, pretty obvious: Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. 4th, Charlie Whitehurst. 5th, Woody Dantzler. 6th, Nealon Green. I'm going to skip 7th because that's the question. 8th is Steve Fuller. Cade moved into 9th. And Cullen Harper rounding out the top 10. So who's missing from this top 10 list?
I think I'd have the answer. I think it's Kyle Parker.
It is not Kyle Parker. It's more recent.
Oh, more recent? DJ Uyunglele?
It is DJ. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, that is surprising. I really thought, because I've looked at these stats before, and I was like, the only name not here that I remember being a surprise in the top 10 was Kyle Parker.
Yeah. So, I wish I had the notes pulled up on my other computer to look. I think Cade he's not too far behind DJ. So he'll pass Steve Fuller and DJ this year, barring any kind of crazy incident. But overall, what were your thoughts on this game?
Before we move on, I did want to go back to what you mentioned. CJ Spiller getting honored into the Ring of Honor this Saturday, but I remember it must have been like 2010 or 2011. Clemson played Maryland at home, and they retired CJ Spiller's number during that game, and like the band like spelled out the number 28. Like, what is the difference between that and the Ring of Honor? I feel like we have more people in the Ring of Honor than have retired numbers. Why did we retire his number first?
The retiring numbers used to mean something, and then we let Deshaun wear 4. We let Feaster wear 28. I don't know.
I think those two numbers are still technically retired. Those were just exceptions.
Yeah, you got to be a special player to probably get the approval to wear that.
Yeah, and maybe the Tavian Feaster one in hindsight wasn't the best move, but
no,
it was probably a recruiting tool.
Especially considering where he ended up after he left Clemson.
Yeah.
What are your overall thoughts? The biggest thing for me, and I kind of touched on it, the turnovers. Last year, turnovers killed you, especially red zone turnovers. And this defense has flipped the switch on it. Early in the game against Wake Forest, I thought that this team was, because Wake was moving the ball a little bit, and I was starting to get the feeling that, does this team rely a little too much on getting turnovers? Because on drives that they weren't getting turnovers early in the game, at least, eventually they ended up taking care of business. But those turnovers have greatly benefited this defense.
Yeah, I agree. And like the red zone turnovers that you mentioned, like, are helping. It's like, instead of turning it over, and when you get into scoring position, you're putting points up on the board most of the time, which is huge. But yeah, I was also impressed with how the team responded after getting shut out in the first quarter. And they gave up their first points in the first quarter all year, which I believe you mentioned also. So, but then you respond from that by scoring 28 points in the second quarter. I guess if you were watching it on TV, Drew, then you might have heard the announcer say that Dabo's like message after the first quarter was, what did you think? Wake Forest was just going to like lay down and take it? Like, they're a team, they're going to fight back. You're going to have to go earn it. So they came out and responded with 28 points in the second quarter, and then I believe 14 or 21 in the third quarter. So yeah, great how they responded. The defense looked really good other than that first quarter, really, and it really shows how big of a difference maker Peter Woods is on the defense, I think. But that's not to diminish DeMonte Capehart, who also had a great game and really played his way up draft boards on a Saturday.
He was getting a push. He was just manhandling Wake Forest. Some of those videos have been going around on Twitter, just doing what he wants with them. He earned himself some money this past week.
Yeah, for sure.
The offense, I've seen a lot of people, especially fans of other teams on social media, they're going to obviously point to the fact that Clemson, or as people who call into the Paul Feinbaum show, they ain't played nobody, Paul. They really haven't played anybody other than Georgia. Yes, hands up, I will admit this is one of Clemson's weakest schedules in a long time. But don't let that distract you. I mean, if you're watching the game, this team is improving week in and week out. This was the most complete game of the season, both offensively and defensively. You've seen the offense let up a little bit towards the end and not finish a game. They finished this game. You got to get some young guys in and just kind of picked up where you left off. So seeing this weekly improvement and the vibe of the team, the confidence of the team, I think this feels like one of those teams, and I'm not saying Clemson's going to go on some crazy playoff run because we have not played anybody yet, but this is kind of reminiscent of what we used to see from Clemson teams. A little slow start, get a little bit better each week. You see some improvements on one side of the ball, and they start to put games together. So that's been nice to see over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and not even I know we talk about it every episode pretty much, but just how much Cade has improved this season. He's like confident in making decisions and really leading the offense. Like when they show him on the sidelines on the broadcast, he is coaching up his teammates, getting with Garrett Riley, figuring out the schemes, and really conveying that to the team of what they need to do to move the ball. So I think Cade has really grown into his role as the leader on this team, and I'm surprised. I thought he was going to be a little bit more reserved, kind of like a Trevor, how Trevor was on the sidelines. Like, Trevor was a good leader, but he wasn't like a motivator in that sense.
Yeah. And kind of on that topic, I watched, I don't know if you've seen it, Clemson puts out the Two Right Turns, a podcast each week with the football team. And last week's episode, it's the first episode I've ever watched. It was Cade and Phil Mafah, and just how Phil Mafah plays on the field and some of those violent hits that he does, and then just to turn around and listen to him in an interview. He's the most like soft-spoken, kind of just like quiet, polite guy, and then you see him run over guys like he did this past weekend at Wake Forest. And also shout out to Ross Taylor. He's the Clemson SID. He makes an excellent podcast host. I don't know what he did prior to being a SID at Clemson, but it seems like he has some kind of broadcasting in him, because he sounded legit.
Yeah, I haven't checked that out, but I did get suggested it. Like, it popped up on my YouTube, so I'll have to watch that.
Twitter polls.
Twitter poll of the week. The only way you can participate is if you follow us on Twitter at nachos_analysis. Each week we post a poll where we'll leave it up to you, the listener, to give your input. And so this week's poll is, how does Clemson finish out the second half of the season? The options are 6-0, 5-1, 4-2, and 3-3. Before we get into the listeners' results, Matthew, what are you feeling about this poll here? How does the Tigers finish out the season?
I'm personally leaning towards the 6-0. Just like I just mentioned, the schedule shapes up really well for the second half of the season, and nothing this team has shows that they're slowing down. They just continue to get better, and they seem intent on improving. Even though you're winning these games by 35 points, they're still intent on improving all the little things that they're still getting or making mistakes on. And that's a really good quality to have in a team. Like, they're not satisfied with where they are, and they just keep getting better and playing better. So I think we're going to continue to see that throughout the rest of the season.
I tend to agree with you too. I think 6-0 is definitely possible. 6-0 is something that this team can achieve. I don't know. I feel like I've been burned a little too much the last couple seasons. I feel like there's like a slip up that's going to pop from around the corner or something. So I voted 5-1 in this one. Before we reveal the results, listener response, Gerald J. Give Gerald a response or a follow on Twitter. He said, I voted 6-0, but the stretch of Louisville, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt will be a tough challenge. Clemson should win those, but not a given, especially in those away games, especially if those away games are cold and rainy. We are coming to that time of year. The way this poll shook out, similar to last week. I think last week, and you may have noted it, the first time we've ever just gotten like 0 responses for a particular answer. Weren't there 2 answers last week that nobody voted for?
Yeah, there's 0%.
So we have a 0% this in this week's poll. 4 and 2 got 0% of the vote. Evidently, a couple Gamecocks got in and voted 3 and 3 with 1% of the vote. 5 and 1 with 26% of the vote, and 73% of the listeners agree with you, Matthew, and say 6-0. So we do have your more tough, don't put this in quotes, tough stretch here as far as Clemson's schedule goes coming up, and the way that South Carolina has looked defensively. It's going to be a tough matchup there to wrap up the regular season.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the outlook on Clemson's schedule flipped from thinking the first half you had some trap games and really tough away games, or at least the one tough away game in Tallahassee. That ended up not being the case. Now you have Louisville looking pretty good this year, Virginia Tech looking decent, Pitt still undefeated in conference play, and South Carolina just put up a fight against Alabama. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I still believe in the 6-0, though.
Buckle in. It's going to be I think this latter part of the first half of the season has been insane just in the landscape of college football. And I think it's going to even get even more crazier here in the coming weeks.
Fact or fiction?
Fact or fiction, Texas is the only elite team this year in college football.
I am actually going to say fiction because I feel like we talked about it earlier that the parity in college football right now is very high. And I think Texas is a sign of that. Like they do have great athletes, and they were able to continue being maybe the best team in the country with their starting quarterback out. So that's an indication of being an elite team. But I think there are other teams in that same conversation right now, like Oregon, maybe even Clemson at this point.
I'm gonna say fiction as well. I think Oregon's in that conversation. I know they just beat Ohio State. Ohio State could be their defense. They spent a lot of money to get some guys in through the transfer portal there to Ohio State, and they gave up a lot the other night. But I'm gonna say fiction as well. Fact or fiction, C.J. Spiller gets inducted into the Ring of Honor this weekend. That's not the fact or fiction. The fact or fiction is the best play of his career came in 2006 against Georgia Tech when he juked the Yellow Jackets players. I believe it was 2 or 3 in that one play, the night that the Tigers broke out the all-purple uniforms.
This might be my favorite play of CJ Spiller's career, but I know there are others that rival it, like a kick return, and then he also had a crazy run against Maryland, I remember, early in his career. Like, there's some really good competitors out there. That might be the most flashy one, though, and I used that one for our podcast intro recently. I've been doing like a play of the week, like a historic play of the week, and that was, I think, 2 weeks ago, Drew's first week out. So I'll go fiction just because but it's my favorite. So
yeah, I'm gonna go fact, and you know that this is my favorite game of all time in Clemson. I'm not a huge fan of Clemson wearing purple, but that night in that situation, you haven't seen it in however many long. They warm up in one color. They show up at the top of the hill in all purple. And then Georgia Tech, Clemson, both highly ranked at this point. I think it was a top 15 matchup. And C.J. Spiller just goes off in that game, and that play in particular. I think it's his best, and it is my personal favorite. So I'm going to go fact on that one. Fact or fiction, Heisman odds don't matter. Travis Hunter is the only answer.
Yeah, so this looks like Boise State quarterback leading or has the best odds, then followed by Dylan Gabriel, Cam Ward, Quinn Ewers, and Carson Beck. And with the same odds as Carson Beck, Cade Klubnik. So those are all before Travis Hunter. Or actually, Travis Hunter is tied. They all have 1,500 along with Jalen Milroe in that conversation,
what
too.
What sports book is that?
I am reading this. It's like an article on on3.com.
Okay.
I agree. I think Travis Hunter is the best player in the country, and if the Heisman is the best player in the country award, Travis Hunter is the Heisman winner. But obviously, you have great play happening all across the country. It would be shocking to me if Boise State's quarterback can keep this lead right now and win the Heisman. That would be insane, honestly. I do kind of like the Dylan Gabriel pick. That's not a bad look. And Cam Ward, I'm not sure if Miami's going to, stay undefeated throughout the whole season. So I feel like that's going to reflect poorly on him, just like Travis Hunter's odds dropped a lot after this last loss that Colorado took. So it's going to be interesting. I feel like it's really up in the air right now, and it's not like that Lamar Jackson year where the Heisman was won in September.
Well, I'm going to say a fiction for that reason. If the Heisman was given out today, I say Travis Hunter. But I did that ticked me off the year Lamar Jackson won it, because he won it off of the first month of the season. Everybody pretty much made up their mind at that point. But if I'm betting on this, I'm betting that Travis Hunter ends up winning it. I think he is the Heisman, but I just wouldn't cast my ballot quite so early. That's one of my biggest pet peeves with all these Heisman voters, that they have the ability relatively early in the season to go ahead and cast their ballot, when you should probably have like a 1 week window towards the end to cast your ballot.
And after conference championships, and a little bit, maybe even after the playoffs, I would prefer the Heisman to be given out after that. Like, I think it is technically a regular season award, but that's part of the season, and some players make or break in that time. So in December and January. So I do wish that the Heisman took that into consideration.
All right, time to review our Week 7 Pick'em contest. Great week for us. Matthew and I both go 3-1. Puts us still tied with our season total of 16 points. A couple weeks ago, I said that you and I, the next episode, we're going to decide on our punishment. And you said, yeah, we'll probably not. And then I haven't been on an episode since. And I also have not thought of it since. So
See, I have thought about that you said that, and I was expecting us to just make a decision today. But I think that the bar challenge is our best option. 12 hours in a bar, every drink, but maybe you could do even shots. Like if a drink has 2 shots in it, that's an hour. If it's a 1-shot drink or a beer, then it's 30 minutes. I don't know.
I could put some beers down. I don't know if I could keep up with the shots.
Yeah, we'll hammer out the details, but I think for now, loser has to spend 12 hours in a bar.
A big week for Matthew and I, 3-1. Matthew, your over is the only one that didn't hit. My favorite of Florida and Tennessee was the only one that didn't hit. Any thoughts on these games?
Yeah, we talked about the Ole Miss LSU game and how I was afraid going to bed about that one, but it ends up staying true. But after going 1-3 2 weeks in a row for me and letting Drew back into the competition, I really needed this 3-1. We did have the same underdog also, so we had one that was going to cancel out anyway, but at least we both hit on that, and the point total can go up.
There we go. I was telling Matthew before we hit record that I was late getting here to record. I was sitting in traffic, realized I hadn't done my picks. And as we started to record, I realized I got 3 of 4. So I'm going to have to come up with an underdog or an under real quick while we're giving out these picks. But Matthew, what is your favorite for this week?
All right. I am sticking in the ACC and Duke hosting Florida State in Durham. Duke is a 3-point favorite against Florida State, and I think Duke is more than 3 points better than Florida State is. Florida State might finish the season 1-11.
Hey, I'm here for that one. For my favorite pick, Mizzou hosts Auburn. Auburn can't really seem to figure it out. They did play Georgia a little tough last week, but Mizzou minus 4.5 points is my favorite pick.
All right, and underdog, I'm also staying in the ACC, and I'm really hoping this one wins outright because I'm going Miami taking the trip to Louisville. Louisville is a 4-point underdog to Miami, and I think that's going to be a really close game. And the way Miami has played the last couple weeks, Louisville is definitely going to be in that game and have opportunities to win. So kind of like that there.
I like that game too. I almost picked that one. We may hear more of that game here in a little bit, but for my underdog, I have Illinois hosting Michigan. Michigan is a 3-point favorite. I'm going with Illinois as the 3-point dog.
I like that one. And for my over, we already talked about this game a little bit also, or one of these teams, but Colorado traveling to Arizona. That's over under at 55.5 right now. And last year, this game was a shootout, and I'm expecting similar things this year. So, Colorado, Arizona, over 55.5.
All right. And I'm typing these into the doc as I go, and I know you mentioned, I don't remember what word it was, but I spelled something wrong 2 weeks in a row that you shouted me out for. Well, don't look at the word Illinois right now, because for some reason My autocorrect is not popping up. You mentioned Miami, Louisville. I'm going with that for my over under set at 61.5. I think both of these teams can put up some points.
Yeah, not a bad bet. I thought about it, but I was a little scared. But lastly, another game we've already talked about this episode, Georgia going to Austin to take on Texas, and that over under is set at 56.5. So I think that might be a very defensive battle for probably who the leader in the SEC from here on out.
All right, I'm picking on a whim here. My under pick, I'm going to take Charlotte on the road at Navy, 55.5.
No, that's actually a pretty good one that you could just pull out right there.
Well, when you want to under, you go like towards Iowa Naval Academy, that kind of thing. So that was the first one that jumped out at me.
I like it.
All right, let's preview the Clemson Virginia matchup in Death Valley this weekend. The homecoming for Coach Tony Elliott. He brings the Cavaliers in for the first time back to Clemson since he left. He's one of, I think, just 4 or 5 former players to return as a head coach to face the Tigers. Overall, Clemson leads the series 48-1. At home, Clemson leads the series 21-3-1. The last meeting between the two programs came at 2020. I believe it was 2020, so it was that weird season where you, me, and your dad sat down over there in the bottom corner where the band normally is when they had everybody spaced out.
Yeah. Actually, that was like one of the only COVID games I didn't go to in 2020 because one of my friends was having had a wedding in the upstate that weekend, so I was glued to the TV during the reception.
I must have just sat at that game with just your dad.
Yeah, I think so, because there's pictures of me on the dance floor with holding my phone up to my ear, listening to the call on the roar.
Tigers currently have a 5-game win streak against the Cavaliers. As of Tuesday, the spread is 21.5 points, over under set at 57.5. As I mentioned, Coach Elliott becoming the 15th head coach of all time to face Clemson after previously coaching either in a head coaching or assistant coach capacity at Clemson. Tigers attempting to win its 6th consecutive game against Virginia for the first time since opening its all-time series with the Cavaliers. Entering into the game, linebacker Barrett Carter is attempting to become the first Clemson player with a full sack in 4 consecutive games since Shaq Lawson did it in the final 4 games of 2015. And then revisiting a little Clemson UVA history, back on October 8th, 1960, Clemson defeated Virginia 21-7, and they used special pants to help with the rain. It was a rain game, so it helped with the protection. After the contest, Clemson sent those pants to Greenville and allowed Furman to use the pants for a game they had that night against William and Mary. Furman head coach Bob King said, after those big Clemson boys got out of them, some of our guys had a hard time making them stay up, and we had to tape the legs of the pants for several players. Those pants were responsible for beating 2 teams from the state of Virginia on that same day.
That's a really funny stat, and I assume that they got put through a dry cycle or something in between then, because it sounds really gross if they just went straight from being soaked in a football game to
I can't imagine they smelt very good, that's for sure.
Maybe that's why Furman won, is because the other team just didn't want to get that close to them.
Yeah. I forget what NFL player it was. I saw something recently. Who was it? An NFL player admitted basically, when I had to go to the bathroom, I would just stand on the sideline and pee on myself.
What?
Because I didn't have time to go into the locker room, and no one wanted to touch me. It was a big time NFL defensive player. I can't remember who it was. I saw something on Twitter or something recently where it was said. I have to go back and look and see which player it was.
If you know and you're listening, comment it on whatever platform you're listening.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on this matchup with Virginia, homecoming for Tony Elliott, CJ Spiller going to the Ring of Honor, another Saturday in Death Valley?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think Tony Elliott's return to Death Valley is a big storyline, and I'm sure it's going to be a big deal for him. Probably give him a little extra motivation that if his team's bought into him as a person, they probably will come play a little harder for him. But I also think that Clemson is going to be prepared because they don't want him to come in and spoil this good half of the season that they just finished up. But I do expect this one to be a little bit closer than what we've seen, maybe close to similar to the Florida State game. But it's still a similar story where Clemson's going to need to respond to some pressure from Virginia, but still end up pulling away and coming out with an impressive win.
Yeah, I'm looking forward, as I said, another Saturday in Death Valley. I think we can expect the Tigers to continue to improve offensively this week. Tony Elliott, not one of those guys that I think Dabo Swinney is going to put his foot on the throat and just send the offense out there all 4 quarters. But I think the Tigers should win this game, and obviously they're 21 points favorites. And just looking forward to seeing some improvement like we have consistently from game to game this season. But as always, thank you all for listening, and be sure to join us next week where we'll talk some ball. Peace.
Peace.